here today. Since it's UNSPAM, and apparently the theme of UNSPAM is vulnerability. This is my first live in-person talk ever, so I am so happy it's here. I too, with 90% of email geeks, tend to be a total introvert, so any other introverts who are interested in speaking know that this is always a safe space, and to go for it. So with that said, today we're going to talk about accessibility in practice and why it's so important in email. Accessibility was not on my bingo card of things that I would be talking about. Here we are because I have become incredibly passionate about it, because I think that all people need to be able to read our emails, because that's the point of email, right? It's to communicate. And if people can't read them, then what's the point? So before we really begin, this is something I would love for us to ponder on. Each of us has a platform. Whether you are Twitter famous, Instagram famous, you lead a community, maybe you don't lead anything, but you have a really close-knit group of friends. And no matter what we're doing, we need to lead with kindness and compassion in everything we do. And like I just mentioned before, that includes communicating with our emails. So before we actually get to accessibility, I'm going to kick it back to a little over 30 years ago at this point, wow, to 1993-ish. And I'm going to tell you about a little girl. And this little girl, when her parents would give her directions, 3 kids, go put on your jacket, your gloves, and your shoes, because we're in the Boston area and it snows all the time like it's supposed to this weekend. We need to leave. And that little girl would stand there, and she wouldn't move. She had no idea what was being said to her. It was like a brick wall was in her head, and just the words bounced right off. She could hear, there was nothing wrong with her hearing, but for whatever reason, there were no words there. Until one day she went through a lot of therapies and sign language, and suddenly the world around her exploded as those bricks came down one by one. So we flash forward to 2017. The little girl, who obviously know now is me, wasn't supposed to reveal that for another slide. It's okay. Bumbled my way through elementary school with some therapies, got to middle school, made it through high school pretty well, did okay in college, and I ended up stumbling into a career that I actually did not know existed. Email as a career? What? But it was really hard at first with all the details, really hard. Could ask a lot of questions like this, not really knowing what to do, especially when you come in as that email person of one. And then this happens. So quick sidebar, I'm the type of person who does quick sidebars, by the way. In December of 2017, I made a mistake in our email program almost every single day. I was in a newish job, a newish program, and I totally screwed it up at a nonprofit during the busiest time of the year, really. And this happened. And how do you bounce back from this? And I promise I'm going to get to the accessibility thing, because you might be like, what the heck does this do with accessibility? And I promise it does. Static. This is one of those images that I feel like you can just of those old TVs with the dials and whatnot. I used to use one at my grandmother's house. And you don't know what to do. And you can't process it. It's like you're frozen and there are no thoughts there. I'm going to formally introduce myself. My name is Megan Boshuyzen. That's how you pronounce my last name. Fun fact, it means forest house in Dutch. Very nicely brought upon me by my husband. I am the senior email developer at Pathwire. I co-founded an award-winning children's publishing house called Mango Marigold Press, and I write an email newsletter called It Depends, Service Mark coming soon. Not really, I'm not service marking it, it's okay, you can use the phrase. So here we go, accessibility. Yay! How can we build accessible emails that look really good and then we don't overload our brain? And I'm going to go back for a second because I missed the most important part of this. The whole point of that story before, which I totally missed, which is also part of what I'm going to tell you about, is that I have a learning disability, and it's called auditory processing disorder. And this is the first time I'm on a stage speaking publicly about this. It is something that I have hidden for most of my life. I flirted with talking about it a little bit publicly on Twitter, in a virtual talk, until finally I am here talking to you guys live. So auditory processing disorder is kind of what it sounds like. It's a processing thing in your brain. Your ears are not hooked up to your brain right. So for many people, when they have auditory processing disorder, if they're talking to a person and there's somebody nearby having a conversation, it's very hard to focus. If you're watching a television show, you might have the volume up really high because it's easier to process the audio that way. Or you may watch TV and movies with subtitles, which is another accessibility feature, right? So hearing it and reading it makes it easier to understand. You also might notice somebody might have auditory processing disorder when you say something to them and they'll say, what did you, oh, okay, you said blah, 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 whatever the thing. Or words might sound one way and you might think it's a different word and you just don't process those sounds right. And it can cause language delays. So when I was young, at around age 3, I still was not speaking. I had to learn to speak via sign language. Today, I'm happy to report I can speak. Obviously, I'm here. And I apparently have a very good vocabulary, if I do say so myself. So auditory processing disorder also kind of can come along with things like ADHD or ADHD type symptoms, ASD, and that sort of thing. So executive functioning can be really hard, really a lot of those ADHD type symptoms that you may see. So now we're going to talk about accessible emails. So alt text is the first thing we're going to talk about, since it is extremely important and often left out of our emails. And our alt text is basically what happens when our emails are turned off. And I am once again asking you to use your alt text. Or at least Grandpa Bernie is. And we all like to listen to him, right? Here's a good example that I got off of the Email on Acid website. It was an article about alt text. Find more fun on social. What social? Where are we going? I don't know if with contrast you can see that there are borders around buttons, but there is. That's another accessibility issue, is our contrast. We'll go over that later. So here we add alt text. You can see one image that's not loading or turned off is Facebook, one is LinkedIn, and one is Twitter. And that will let us know where we need to go without having to rely on the images being turned on. I have this image too that I grabbed off the really good emails. Lovely picture of Gilda speaking. So I grabbed this image because I actually did check out the alt text on it. And it said UNSPAM. RDE team, I am really, really sorry I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry, please don't hate me and invite me back again. So if I were creating the email, I would describe it as either using Gilda's name, Gilda Hilaire, stands on the stage at UNSPAM, speaking about email careers. Or if I did not know her name, I would say a woman stands in amazing red heels and an awesome outfit, talking about email careers. Something like that. Your alt text should be descriptive and helpful to the user. And when you do write alt text, you can't do this everywhere or in like a drag and drop, but if you are a developer, you can control your font size so that it's actually readable, which is pretty awesome. Or you can wrap your image tag in an H1 or another header tag to bring that sizing in. And this will also help you keep that alt text on brand, create some hierarchy, which we'll talk about in a moment, and otherwise make that email readable. Speaking of visual hierarchy, which is just a really fancy word for how we visualize and organize our information. Here, we're going to go through some examples of some emails I really like that I think have really good hierarchy. With emails, I always like to say keep it simple. Some people like to call it design golf, where you use as little elements as possible to convey your point. So here from this company DAMP, which I did find on the RGE website, yay, uses a simple one-column layout, so it looks good on desktop, it looks good on mobile. You'll run into very few issues with a layout that's just one column. But what I really like about this one is that the hierarchy makes these emails easy to read. So we have our logo, and then we have a nice H1 header, which is big and easy to read, with our text all left aligned, which is also really important, and we'll go over that too, with our image, and then we have smaller headers and text and CTAs that we can tap. It has a good semantic structure. When we talk about semantic structure, it's a coding thing. We just mean that we have a header before some paragraphs, and screen readers and other coders essentially are really, really happy to look at it. Our color contrast is really good. So basically our text stands out from our background, so it's easy to read. The text is left aligned, and I'll show you some more aligning things soon. And our CTA stands out really nicely. A couple of things I would change is add some padding between that first header and the body to give it a little bit of breathing room. There was no alt text on these images, so those would definitely need to be added in. And make the padding on the CTA bigger so that it's easier to tap, because it's like the worst when you can't tap something on your phone. And it's good for people who might not be able to move their hands as well. So kind of dovetailing into that, we have our text treatment. And we're going to talk a little bit about typography. You might notice I talk about general design things, because I think and I truly believe that good design tends to lend to really good accessibility. So if you design with those good techniques in mind, then you're already 90% of the way there. So when using typography, which is the set of styles of a font, people tend to use those two words interchangeably. They're really not. So like our typography, our typeface is like Arial. Our font is Arial, size 16 pixels, bold. Like that's a technical difference, but people tend to use them interchangeably. So in our emails, we want to make sure our typeface is really easy to read. So when on your main body, like stylistically on a headline, it's usually okay to play a little bit if you have your headline in an image. But with that body text, you want to make sure it's not something like impact, where it's super bold and squished and you're like, what the heck does all that say? I don't know. So keep it easy to read. Make sure your color contrast is good. You can actually go onto websites online and check your background color versus your foreground color to make sure that people can read your emails. Because if someone's colorblind and that contrast is not good enough, they're not going to be able to read it. And I also recommend sizing your text between 16 pixels and 21 pixels, depending on your audience and the typefaces you use. Anything smaller than 16 pixels starts getting really hard to read on high-res devices. And also align your paragraphs to the left as often as possible. The general rule is anything after 3 lines needs to be left aligned, which our friend Bernie coming again, asking us to left align our text. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. This is my absolute favorite quote from Ted Lasso. I don't know if everyone's Ted Lasso'd out yet, because it's I feel like we're all using it in our presentations for good use. If you haven't seen Ted Lasso, look up the Be Curious, Not Judgmental scene, because it's one of the greatest scenes in any TV show I've ever had. And it is something I like to remind myself, be curious, not judgmental. So I've taken this paragraph and I've aligned it left. Left aligning is really good because it gives your eye a single anchor to always go back to while you're reading. A lot of times in email, we'll see justified text, which can, you see a lot in the book publishing world and whatnot, because you get the nice little margins on the side, and designers like nice little margins and that sort of thing. But the drawback is that then the spacing between your letters become inconsistent. So that also slows down your eyes and can make it hard to read and understand the information. And lastly, we have our other favorite, center text. And when I get long emails and everything is center text, my heart breaks a little. Because now, instead of having a nice anchor to your eyes to go back to, you're just all over the place, and your brain doesn't really know what to expect next. So that's contributing to our cognitive load in our brain to be able to take in new information. So let's look at a text-based email. This is an email from Mango and Marigold Press that I sent out in March 2020 as the whole United States locked down. And we sent out a really simple text-based email with resources for parents. So you can see how we utilize structure with good contrast. I always keep the font size readable, especially for mobile, because the majority of the audience was looking on their phones. Text is left aligned. We use lists for easy reading. The only thing I'd really change about the email is to watch our line height. You can see on the first screenshot there, the spacing between the paragraphs is gigantic. That was partially due to the ESP. I was using a drag and drop editor, and that can get dicey sometimes in ESPs, as I'm sure we've all have messed with, experienced. Another text-based email that I really like is this one from Zeus Jones. And I enjoy that it has a nice big header up top, but also uses color blocking, which I thought was really funny, was mentioned in the Design Trends presentation yesterday. And I was like, oh, that's serendipitous that I chose a color blocking email to show today. To structure it a little bit better, and we have some nice text, some nice headers, and overall I think this is a pretty good email. All of our text is left aligned, where I think they could have easily gone center here, but they decided to keep it left, which I think is really great. I think the text is a little bit small and it can be made a little bit bigger, but it's not egregious in any sense. And I think the CTA could be made a little bit bigger. And the next thing we're going to talk about are click here links. Another favorite of mine that in the past I have rewritten sentences that have come to me that say click here and have not told anybody and sent the email out that way. To view the thing, click here. Why don't we change it to something like solve on board with free coloring pages? If I make the link free coloring pages, I know exactly where I'm going, as opposed to something like click here, where the question, when I'm scanning the email, the question is, what is here? And saying click assumes I'm on a computer. When we are increasingly on mobile devices, or maybe we're on a watch now, who knows what we're on? Or maybe I'm not clicking at all and I'm listening to a screen reader and I'm using my keyboard. So there are just too many downsides to click here to just not make it a sentence with an actionable text link that works on its own and without context. So hello, I'm a link. Obviously, I'm a link bolded, and I'm a link bolded and underlined below. I always recommend bolding and underlining the link. Number one, it stands out. And number two, we've been conditioned by web UX for, 25, 30 years now to recognize bold and underlined as a link. So why change that on the user? And I am once again asking to make your, this is the last one, I promise. I couldn't help myself. I did them in like rapid succession, because I was like, I need memes. And I was like, everyone loves Bernie memes, right? So I'm once again asking you to make your CTAs easier to tap. On all those emails I showed you, that was a critique of mine almost every single time. The CTA is small and not easy to tap. I know Google at one point had a recommendation, I think it was Google, to make your CTAs at least 44 pixels high. I think that's based on material design. So I would definitely try to keep it around there if you have that type of control over your buttons. Of course, a lot of the development stuff I say, it's like your mileage may vary, you might not have a developer. It's all about doing the best you can. There are also some fun HTML things we can talk about that anybody can do. Since in our drag and drop editors, we can usually get into the text editor and flip it over to the HTML and mess with it a little bit. And what's the difference between our strong element versus our B element? If you've been doing HTML things for a really long time, like 20 years ago, you probably used B and slowly switched to strong. And you probably start off with I and switch to M. So a lot of it comes down to screen readers. If you use strong, the screen reader will read that as important. So use strong when it's important. No one's laughing at my developer joke. Come on, guys. I put the thing, okay, whatever. For B, just for decoration, you don't have to put strong. If you don't need the screen reader to call it out, totally cool, you can use the B. And we kind of have the same thing with the emphasis versus the italics. The M is going to tell the screen reader to emphasize that text. And the I, again, just for decoration, it makes your text look really pretty. They all look beautiful, though, just like everyone here today. And now we're going to get to my favorite part, animations. So before I get to this, if you follow me on Twitter, I am bringing up a GIF that I posted on there one time, and I went on a pretty epic rant. It was a lot of fun, and then I was like, well, what do we do to make it better? So this is a GIF from the company Third Love. I'm sorry, I just threw a picture of bras and underwear on there. I hope no one's offended. When this hit my inbox, so with my processing stuff, and it takes me longer to process things, my brain went, oh my God, what is happening here? This GIF is so fast. I don't know how much any of these cost. I don't know what I'm looking at. What is happening? So what happens if we kind of mess with it a little bit? So the first thing I did is that I took the products and I grouped them together. So you can see everything that costs $39 on sale is together. And everything that costs $59 is together. And we had a couple of rogue ones that I kind of had to slide in there. But it's still too fast. I can kind of read it better, but it's really still too fast. So what happens if we slow it down? That feels so much better to me. I don't know about everyone else here. We could probably mess with it a little bit more to get a sweet spot, but it already feels so much better to me to have a GIF like this than the other GIF, which was just flipping literally every second. We could also just not use a GIF. We could just not use a GIF. The GIF doesn't really serve anything for us. So why not also just use it as an image grid? Now we're going to go to coding hints, which, how many developers are here again? Hi, not as many as I would hope, but that's okay. You guys get to hear about my coding hints. So here we have a basic HTML template, and everything that's in this template serves a purpose for accessible email. The first and one of the most important, in my opinion, when you're coding emails is this language attribute. Here we have our language set to English. You can set this according to language code or country code. This is important for screen readers because say I have this template in English with the EN and I am sent text in French and I put French language in there. Then the screen reader is going to read that French like it's English. And there may be transcription errors. I don't know if transcription is really the right word. It might not be read correctly out loud. Whereas if we change that EN to FR, it'll read that French correctly. The next things we add to the template are our role attribute and a couple of ARIA labels. So what this basically tells screen readers, and most of this is about screen readers, what this tells screen readers is that we're looking at an article, which is an HTML5 thing, that the article is an email and what that email is called. And usually for the email ARIA label, you would just put like your subject line or another descriptor about your email. And these are our semantic HTML5 elements and their counterparts. So you would just do role equals, whatever you want to put here. You want to be careful with this though, and not overload your screen reader with any of this. They're called ARIA landmarks, because it's like a navigation. So with an email where you might not have as much content as a web page, you really don't want to bog that navigation down. So our font styles here allow us to set a minimum font size on all of our emails if we want to use REMs, well, really more responsive type units, Ms or REMs, which are based on the width of a capital M. And I kind of did a little like, this is what they are. So for example, if you set your base to 16 pixels, then 2 Ms would equal 32 pixels. This is really helpful if somebody has set their default fonts to be bigger. You'll find that sometimes people on like their iPhones and things like that will make their text bigger to read it better. And using a more responsive text, an M as opposed to a pixel, respects that a little bit more and allows your text to size accordingly. And lastly, we have table role equals presentation. Screen readers, unless you have this role equals presentation, will try to read your table like there's data in it. The presentation tells the screen reader that you're using it just for stylistic and layout purposes and will read the content as it's meant to be read. Most ESPs, I don't know off the top of my head if they put them in. I'm sure some probably do and some probably don't. Our next piece of code, which is one of my absolute favorite pieces of code in HTML, is our picture element. So developers, this is really cool because you can set different images really easily without having to set the media query in your styles and using hide and show tags and that sort of thing. So for example, if you have somebody who has their device set to reducing their motion, so maybe they don't want to get GIFs, you can have a static image for them and serve a GIF for everyone else. So like a really good use case for that would be going back to that Third Love GIF, and we would put the PNG in that source set and then our GIF as our fallback. The really cool thing about picture, obviously this is email so it's not supported everywhere, which is not cool obviously, but what is cool is that if picture is not supported, it'll just fall back to that image source. So you're all good. There's no extra work required, which is awesome. Another really cool use case, which is kind of an aside, is for dark mode. A lot of times developers will use classes to swap your dark mode logos. And here it's really easy to just do it all in one place. And this is just the snippets to get dark mode going. So my one last thing is that usually with and in the presentations I've seen about accessibility, we start talking about statistics and how many people have disabilities and how many people have permanent disabilities or temporary disabilities, and how much money are we gaining or losing by not catering to these people. And to me, none of that matters. It does not. Because accessibility in emails is table stakes. Like, you cannot leave it out. Because just to leave one person out because you think they're not important enough just is not right. And to me, it's about right and it's about wrong. And if email is about communicating, then we are taking everyone into account, no matter what. And we are doing our best to support those people. So, as you walk away from this presentation, I just want you to think about what can you do to help change the culture around accessibility in email, and what can you do today to start moving forward to creating more accessible emails for our and everyone else's communities. Thank you.